The night my husband looked me in the eye and told me to take off my wedding ring, there were 200 people watching. Not one of them said a word. I remember the exact moment it happened. The Harrington Foundation Gala at the Grand Hyatt in Midtown, black tie, open bar, $25,000 a table, which meant the room was full of people who believed their wealth made them untouchable. My husband, his name is Leonard, had worked his way into that room over 15 years. CEO of Caldwell Capital by 41. The kind of man who got introduced at these events, with a list of accomplishments that took longer to read than most people's entire career histories. I had ironed his shirt that morning. I want you to understand that. I had stood in our kitchen at 6:30 a.m., steam rising off the Rowenta iron my mother gave us as a wedding gift, suppressing the collar of a $400 dress shirt so the seams would lie flat. And I had thought, while I was doing it, that I was happy. Or something close to it. I'm 34. We'd been married 6 years. The gala started at 7. By 8:15, Leonard was different. Not drunk? Leonard didn't get sloppy. He got polished in a different direction, like someone had tilted a mirror, and now the reflection wasn't quite right. He was steering me away from certain conversations, laughing a little too easily, touching my back in a way that felt like management rather than affection. Then she walked in. Her name is Fiona. I didn't know that yet. I just saw this woman in a champagne-colored gown, the kind of dress that looks effortless the way only very expensive things can, and I watched Leonard's face do something I had never seen it do in 6 years of marriage. It went soft. He crossed the room before I could say anything. I followed at a distance because my heels were new and the marble floor was unforgiving, and by the time I reached them, he was already laughing at something she'd said. That private laugh, the one I thought belonged only to the two of us in our kitchen on Sunday mornings. "Fiona," he said. "I didn't know you'd be here." The way he said her name. Like he'd been holding it in his mouth all night. She saw me before he introduced me. Her eyes went to my hand first, specifically to the ring, and something moved across her face that I couldn't read. Leonard noticed where she was looking, and then my husband, in front of the Harrington Foundation donors and their wives and the photographer from the Timestyle section, reached over and slid the ring off my finger. "We're separated," he said to her, just like that. Casual. Like he was correcting a misunderstanding about a dinner reservation. "It's complicated. She keeps the ring for appearances." I stood there holding a glass of Perrier and felt the floor shift under me. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was watching Fiona's face, recalibrating based on her reaction, the way he recalibrated in board meetings when a deal wasn't landing the way he'd expected. I was a liability he was managing. I said his name. Leonard. He turned then, and I saw it clearly, the irritation. Not guilt, not even embarrassment, pure irritation that I had interrupted. "Give us a minute," he said. That was when I understood. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to pull me aside and explain. He had made a calculation, decided the cost of humiliating me was acceptable, and moved on. I was the rounding error. I set my glass down on the nearest table. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I made a choice in that moment to not let him see it. I walked to the coat check, retrieved my coat, and got into a taxi on 42nd Street. Halfway home to our apartment on the Upper West Side, I realized I was still holding the ring. I had taken it back from his hand without thinking about it. He hadn't even noticed. "My name is Catherine. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My grandmother, her name was June, died when I was 19 and left me 3 things. A casserole dish, a Bible with her handwriting in the margins, and a ring. Not an expensive ring by any jeweler's standard. Small round diamond in a simple white gold band from 1962, the year my grandfather proposed to her at a Frisch's Big Boy on Main Street because he couldn't afford anything fancier. She had worn it every single day for 41 years until arthritis made her fingers swell. When Leonard proposed to me, I asked him to use June's ring instead of buying a new one. He had looked at it for a long moment and said, "Of course." I had believed him. That was the version of Leonard I had married. That night, I came home to our apartment and sat on the edge of the bed in my gown and held the ring in my palm for a long time. The apartment smelled like his cologne. His running shoes were by the door. The charger for his phone was still plugged in next to his side of the bed. I put the ring in the inside pocket of my coat. I did not take it off. I called my friend Maggie. She picked up on the second ring, which is what she always does, because Maggie understands intuitively when something is wrong. I told her what happened. I described it as simply as I could, without dramatizing it, because dramatizing it would have required energy I didn't have. There was silence on the other end for a moment. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Still at the gala, I assume, and you're home alone?" "Yes. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. She arrived in 22. She brought a bottle of Trader Joe's Cabernet and a container of leftover pasta from her fridge. We sat on my kitchen floor because neither of us wanted to sit on furniture that had Leonard's shape pressed into it. She poured the wine, and I talked, and she listened without trying to fix it, which is a skill most people don't have. At some point, I said, "The worst part is I didn't see it." Maggie looked at me over her wine glass. "Which part? Any of it?" "I thought I knew who he was." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew who he was letting you see." I thought about that for a long time after she left. Leonard came home at midnight. I heard the key in the lock, his shoes on the floor, the refrigerator opening. He did not come to the bedroom. I lay in the dark and listened and thought about my grandmother's ring in the pocket of my coat, which was hanging on the hook by the door. I thought about June in 1962, accepting a ring from a man who drove her to a burger joint because he couldn't afford a restaurant. I thought about what she would say if she could see me now. I thought she would not want me to be quiet about this. In the morning, Leonard made coffee. He brought me a cup the way he always had, without asking, the way you do when you've memorized someone's routines so completely that the gesture is automatic. He set it on my nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed. "We should talk," he said. I looked at him. He had the expression he used when he was about to deliver bad news in a meeting. Controlled, slightly apologetic, already moving toward the resolution he'd predetermined. "Fiona and I have a history," he started. "I know," I said. "I figured that out. It ended badly. I didn't handle it well. When I saw her last night, I panicked. You told her we were separated." "I know. You took my ring off my finger." "I know, Catherine." In front of 200 people. He put his coffee down. "I'm not going to excuse what I did. It was wrong. But I need you to understand the context." "I don't need context," I said. "I need you to understand what you actually did." He went quiet. That was new. Leonard was rarely quiet unless he was calculating. "I want to talk to someone," I told him. "A counselor. I think we need it." He agreed immediately, which surprised me. He said he'd reach out to someone that week. He reached across and put his hand over mine. I left my hand under his and thought, I need to know who Fiona is. I spent that afternoon doing what any reasonable person would do in the information age. I found her. LinkedIn first. Fiona Marsh, Director of Development at a nonprofit in the Financial District. Columbia undergrad, NYU for her master's. 36. Beautiful in the way that looks accidental, but isn't. Then I called Maggie. They dated in his 20s, Maggie told me. She had already looked too, because Maggie is an investigative journalist and cannot help herself. Before he made his money. She was the one who left him, apparently. Based on what I can find, the breakup was bad enough that he basically rebuilt his entire life around proving something. Proving something to her? Or to himself. Hard to say. I thought about the way Leonard had looked at her. The way his face went soft. He's still in love with her, I said. Maggie didn't argue. That night, I told Leonard I was going to visit my sister in Philadelphia for a few days. I needed space to think, I said. He nodded like a man who believed he was handling the situation correctly by giving me room. What I actually needed was time. Not to grieve. I was past that faster than I expected, which told me something about how much of myself I had already been losing quietly over the years. What I needed was to think clearly without him in the same apartment, without his coffee cup, and his cologne and his shoes, by the door, reminding me that I had organized my life around someone who could take my ring off in public and call it complicated. I drove to Philadelphia. My sister's name is Pam, and she is 4 years older than me and has no patience for self-pity but infinite patience for strategy. She poured me a glass of wine and said, "Tell me everything," and I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" she asked. "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." I looked at her. "You want him to face what he did," she said, "not just apologize. You want it to cost him something real." She was right. That was exactly what I wanted. Not revenge for its own sake. I don't think I'm wired for that, but accountability. The thing he had never once been asked to provide in his entire life. I stayed in Philadelphia for a week. I told Leonard I was taking more time. He called once a day, texts in between, all appropriate and slightly formal, like a man managing optics even in his marriage. I met with a family law attorney on a Tuesday morning. Her name is Beverly, and she had the kind of manner that made you feel simultaneously calmer and more alert, which I think is the ideal quality in a lawyer. She explained to me in clear terms what 6 years of marriage meant in New York State: community property, marital assets, the business he'd built during our marriage, which I had supported in ways that were indirect but real, the dinners I'd organized, the clients I'd entertained, the years I'd scaled back my own career as a grant writer to accommodate his schedule. "You have more standing than you might think," Beverly said. I wrote down everything she told me. I went back to New York on a Thursday. Leonard met me at the door, which he never did, and I understood he'd been more worried than he'd let on. He cooked dinner, pasta with a cream sauce, something he made well, and we sat across from each other at the table we'd bought at a Brooklyn flea market the first year we were married. "I've been thinking," he said. "I want to make this right." "I know you do," I said. "I booked an appointment with Dr. Renfrew. Couples counseling, like you asked. I appreciate that." He reached across the table and covered my hand again. That same gesture. I looked at his hand on mine and thought about Beverly's office and the legal pad covered in my handwriting. "I need to ask you something directly," I said. He waited. "Are you still in love with Fiona?" A pause. Half a second too long. "No," he said. "That was a long time ago." I nodded. I smiled in a way that I knew looked like relief. I had learned that from 6 years of watching him manage rooms, sometimes you let people see what they need to see. The next 2 months, I was deliberate. I went to the counseling sessions with Leonard, and I was honest about everything except what I was planning. I talked about the gala, the ring, the humiliation. Dr. Renfrew was good. She drew out from Leonard the admission that he had never fully processed the end of his relationship with Fiona, that he had folded the wound into the infrastructure of his ambition rather than actually healing it. Leonard cried once in session. I handed him a tissue and felt something close to pity, which surprised me. But pity is not the same as forgiveness. And forgiveness without accountability is just absorbing someone else's damage. Meanwhile, I was building. I called my old boss at the Hudson Valley Community Foundation, a man named Gene who had watched me walk away from a career I was good at to support Leonard's ascent. And he told me without hesitation that there was a director of development position open and he wanted me to apply. I applied. I organized my financial records, everything, and sent them to Beverly. 6 years of tax returns, account statements, documentation of the dinners and events, and client entertaining I had managed on Leonard's behalf. I told Maggie what I was doing. She was the only one who knew the whole picture. "Are you going to tell him?" she asked. "When the time is right," I said. The time came on a Saturday in October, 8 weeks after the gala. Leonard had been invited to speak at a finance conference at the Javits Center. It was a big deal for him. Keynote spot, 2,000 people in the audience. He had spent 2 weeks on his remarks. I had read them and suggested edits, the way I always did, because I have a better ear for language than he does, and he knows it. He was in the green room beforehand when his phone buzzed with a notification, and he stepped out to take a call. He left his phone on the table. I am not proud of what I did next. I also am not going to pretend it wasn't necessary. The text was from Fiona. It said, "Watching the live stream. Can't wait to see you after." There were 11 prior texts in the thread. They started 3 weeks after the gala. They were not appropriate for a married man. I took photographs of every one of them. Then I put the phone back exactly where he'd left it and went to find my seat in the main hall. Leonard gave a very good speech. He is genuinely compelling in front of an audience. That part of him is real, and I had loved it once. I sat in the third row and watched him work the room and thought, I know who you are now, and you are not going to walk away from this without it costing you something. Afterward at the reception, I found Beverly in the crowd. She was a friend of the conference organizer. I had not arranged this on purpose, but I had not been surprised to see her either, because New York is a small city when you run in certain circles. I handed her my phone with the photographs already pulled up. She looked at them. She looked at me. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "About 2 hours," I said. She smiled, just slightly, and put her own phone away. I told Leonard I wanted a divorce on a Sunday morning. He was making coffee again. Same kitchen, same ritual. The Rowenta iron was on the counter because I had started ironing my own clothes, not his, and I had not yet put it away. I had the paperwork on the table. He turned when I said it. He looked at the papers. He looked at me. "Catherine, I met with a family law attorney in September," I said. "I've been documenting our marital finances since then. Beverly has everything." He was very still. "The texts from Fiona have been provided to Beverly as well," I said, "which establishes ongoing communication that began shortly after the gala. You went through my phone. You left it on a table." He put down his coffee. His jaw was tight. The polished version was cracking around the edges, and underneath it was something raw and a little frightened. And I recognized it because I had felt it myself in the taxi home from the gala. "We can do this 2 ways," I said. "Beverly and your attorney negotiate a fair settlement that reflects my contributions to your career over the last 6 years. And we handle this like adults. Or we litigate, in which case Fiona's name becomes relevant in a court proceeding and both of your professional networks find out through the filing." He sat down. He was quiet for a long time. "This is not who you are," he finally said. "You're right," I said. "I spent 6 years being who you needed me to be. I'm figuring out who I actually am." He signed the initial papers that day. I started the job at the Hudson Valley Community Foundation in January. Grant writing, program development, a team of 8 reporting to me. Jean met me in the lobby on my first day and shook my hand and said, "It's good to have you back," and I thought, yes, it is. The settlement was finalized in February. Beverly had been right. I had more standing than I'd thought. The apartment in the West Side went on the market. I found a 2-bedroom in Astoria that had good light and neighbors who nodded to me in the hallway, and a coffee shop 3 blocks away where the barista already knew what I ordered by my 3rd visit. I moved in on a Saturday. Maggie helped me carry boxes. Pam drove up from Philadelphia with her truck and her husband and her 8-year-old, who decided the entire move was an adventure and kept trying to name the boxes. When the last box was in, Pam opened the Cabernet she'd brought and poured 4 glasses, and we sat on the floor of my new living room because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. "How do you feel?" Pam asked. I thought about it honestly. I felt lighter. Not happy exactly. Not yet. Not in the uncomplicated way happiness sometimes gets described. But lighter. Like something heavy had been lifted off my chest that I had gotten so used to carrying that I had stopped noticing the weight until it was gone. I reached into the pocket of my jacket, the same coat, the one I'd been wearing the night of the gala, and I took out my grandmother June's ring. I had kept it in that pocket for 4 months. Through the attorney meetings and the documentation and the conference at the Javits Center and the Sunday morning in the kitchen with the papers on the table. Through all of it, that ring had been right there. Turned it in the light. Small round diamond. Simple white gold band. 1962. Pam was watching me. "I almost threw it away," I told her, that first night. I don't know. I was so angry. I wanted to throw everything connected to it away, but you didn't. No, I thought about why. I think I knew, even in that taxi, even when I was still shaking, that the ring didn't belong to the humiliation. It didn't belong to Leonard, or to that night, or to any of the damage. It had existed before all of that. It had belonged to a woman who said yes in a Frisch's parking lot in 1962 to a man who couldn't afford a restaurant, and who wore it every day for 41 years because it wasn't about the ring. It was about the yes. "I'm going to wear it again someday," I said, "when it means what it's supposed to mean." Pam nodded. We drank the wine. The city made its noise outside. The boxes waited patiently in every room. I held the ring a moment longer, then put it carefully in the front pocket of my jeans, close, where I could feel it. That was enough for now.